Well, hello, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Today, we're going to begin reading about the reign of Solomon. So we'll do that from the book of Kings. The pace of the action picks up considerably from what we've had over the last few days. First Kings opens with an account of the last days of King David's reign. We learn that King David is now old. He's chronically cold and apparently largely confined to a sick room. So a young woman, Abishag, is found to nurse him and to keep him warm in a strictly platonic relationship. Though later it turns out that she does end up becoming a figure in some palace intrigue associated with the transfer of the throne to Solomon. Adonijah, Solomon's older brother, and apparently the only surviving son of King David who could make a legitimate claim to the throne, sets himself up as king with the help of Joab, the commander of David's armies, and Abiathar, the co-high priest during David's reign. If you recall, God had already told David that Solomon was to follow him as king. So Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, make David aware of Adonijah's move, and David immediately arranges for Solomon to be anointed king and to sit on the throne as his co-regent until David's own death. Solomon deals kindly with Adonijah in spite of what Adonijah has done, and he doesn't kill him, even though Adonijah had tried to take the throne. David gives David now gives Solomon his final instructions. David adjures Solomon to walk upright before the Lord, to seek always after the Lord's ways, and then he tells Solomon that at the appropriate time, punishment in the form of their very lives, was to be meted out to both Joab and Shimei for their offenses committed during David's reigns. After David dies, Solomon assumes the throne. Solomon becomes the sole regent, assumes the throne solely. Adonijah asked for Abishag, the woman who nursed King David, for her to be his wife, which Solomon interprets, probably correctly, as a precursor to yet another attempt at the throne. So Solomon acts decisively, and this time he does execute Adonijah. And then Joab, who was a supporter of Adonijah and was to have been executed anyway, excuse me, as punishment for the murders that he had committed under King David. And then Solomon banishes Abiathar to his property under close watch outside of Jerusalem, stripping him of his role as co high priest. Within 3 years, Shimei breaks an oath that he had made before God to Absalom, and he also ends up being executed. So at this point, the loose ends from King David's reign are largely cleaned up. And when we return to the book of Kings for our next reading, we'll focus more completely on Solomon's reign and not these leftovers. Now, that was a very quick review of these two chapters. A lot got left out in my summary, so be sure to read those two chapters. All right, we also have three Psalms for today. Now, this could turn into quite a bit of reading by the time we're done, so you may want to split things into a couple of days here. But first, Psalm 37. Psalm 37 contrasts the fall of the wicked with the renewal of the righteous. It seems so often that the wicked are succeeding as the righteous are falling behind. But this psalm reminds us that it is after only a very brief time that the wicked man's prosperity fails completely, while the righteous man's peace endures forever. Psalm 37 is an acrostic psalm where each verse begins with a successive Hebrew letter in the alphabet. It's not super obviously, but if you look, it's not super obvious, but if you happen to be reading in the Lutheran Study Bible, you'll notice a slightly larger white space between each verse pair that indicates this progression of the letters, the first letters. This psalm is kind of lengthy. As I mentioned a bit ago, you might want to split into a couple of pieces. If you do so, a reasonable division would be to read verses 1 through 19 and then verses 20 to 40. The first two verses introduce the theme of the Well, the temporary nature of the apparent success of the wicked. Verses 3 to 7 encourage us to trust in God's goodness. And in 8 to 15 ask us to consider the ultimate fate of the wicked. Verses 15 through 20 encourage us to be satisfied with the blessings of God. Verses 21 to 30 adjure us to continue to lead a godly life. And the final verses, 32 to 40, reprise this overall theme of the psalm. Persevere, for the Lord has already won your reward. Psalm 71. Well, Psalm 71 seems to be written for and likely by an older believer, one who understands and maybe even struggles with the assaults on their faith that come as the end approaches, especially the temptation to think their faith may have been in vain. The author of this psalm is not recorded. We don't know for sure who it is, but many suspect it was King David. And that makes it an appropriate psalm to read since we just read about King David's last years. The Lutheran Study Bible notes tell us that the psalmist confronts the temptation to doubt head on by proclaiming the great saving deeds of God and meeting that assault with faith, hope, faithfulness, witness, and praise. The psalm opens with a statement and a prayer that God would deliver the psalmist once again. It recalls the help received in the past, notes the present need, and pleads for help once again. The psalmist declares his hope and he offers praise both now and promised praise in the future, asking to be allowed to declare God's power to the next generation. The psalmist closes with confidence that the Lord will deliver him, and he praises God using the past tense for that deliverance. In other words, the deliverance that he's either already seen or that he holds so confident in faith that he holds it as though he's already received it. The Lord is faithful and true, and he does as he promises. Now, revenge is a difficult topic. Although our reading from Kings today makes it an appropriate subject for us today, Psalm 94, our last psalm for the day, calls for God's avenging justice. Now, there's a big difference between the vengeance of the Lord and the vengeance of man. For us, quite frankly, vengeance is it's always sin. I mean, I'm certainly open to discussion on that, but I can't really think of any situation where revenge would not be sinful for us. For God, though, it is simply just punishment that follows from his holy nature. In other words, it has to be because it's just. God provided a payment for sin. Those who scorn that payment will be stuck answering for their own sins on Judgment Day. They'll pay the penalty their sin deserves. When the psalmist asked how long, don't think of that in human terms or on our timeline. Think of it as the question of when will Jesus return? Because that's the day of the Lord's vengeance. Again, the judgment of the ungodly is not simply because they sin. I mean, we've all sinned. It's because they have not repented of their sin. Judgment is delayed now as God waits and continues to give a chance for people to repent. But the day will come when it will be too late. The psalm ends by reminding us that God is our fortress, our refuge. We don't need to fear his judgment. Rather, we look forward to it with eager anticipation. Well, as always, may God be with you and bless you in your readings. I know this is a pretty long set of readings, so maybe you split it up over a couple of days, but just the same, I look forward to getting back with you when we get together again tomorrow. May God be with you and bless you.